Have you ever gotten completely stuck and stressed over making a PowerPoint presentation for work or for school? Where do I start? What do I put on these slides? What's my story? What's the sequence of everything I want to present? Am I missing anything? Calm down. It's gonna be all right. Hi, I'm Sheng, and I help companies and individuals work through their toughest problems. In this video, I'm gonna share with you how to use mind maps to organize your thoughts, to understand the audience and purpose of your presentation, to structure your story, and finally putting everything together into a coherent deck. All right, let's start. Before we start, I recommend grabbing a notebook and an erasable pen. This essentially turns your notebook into a whiteboard, or jump onto an app like Notability with an Apple Pencil. The reason for this is you want to be able to move things around and erase your mind map as new thoughts, as the structure essentially solidifies, right? I actually prefer the application, Notability, primarily because I'm able to shrink things, drag things around, use different colors, so that as I'm forming the story of the presentation, the mind map app essentially can adapt to that. I don't recommend using a dedicated mind mapping software like XMind or iThoughtsX or MindMeister, primarily because when you're storyboarding or drawing diagrams that's going to go into your presentation, they're not very fluid. So I'll get to those in a bit. But yes, have one of these or have one of these. The first step in mind mapping any presentation is to know your objectives. This comes from the former technical director of Niantic Labs, who is fond of saying sufficient to purpose. This means that we actually have to know our purpose first. It sounds really simple, but the fact that he had to remind our team constantly of it means that most people don't actually follow it. And the purpose for a presentation is your audience as well as its objectives. And if we don't adhere to this, well, how many times have we actually gone down a rabbit hole of putting in a lot of work and then getting the feedback from whoever it is that we're trying to present to or our boss, only to basically be told that, hey, we're on the wrong path, right? So know your purpose, know your audience. In mind map form, this is what it looks like. So this is the mind map that I created for my corporate clients around mind mapping, right? Organizing chaos. So this is the actual presentation or the first draft of it. It's changed since, and it's pretty robust. It's got a lot of slides. And here you can see that the central node is workshop. And then here I have my audience and then my goals. So we have, from an audience standpoint, I first need to understand my client company. Again, you have to understand who you're presenting to. So basically, I need to know their business model, their target. And this particular client is a publicly traded advertising technology company. So for them, it's like, finding emergent websites so that they can sell their advertising software to. Website intel, that's basically their business. They provide metrics. They're built with JavaScript. And then in terms of the composition of who they are, it's going to be 25% engineers, 50% sales, and 25% strategy and marketing. How do I know this without essentially asking them directly yet? Is actually I went onto their HR site, right? And I looked at their hiring distribution. Typically, this is reflective of the emphasis of where the company is going. I understand who my audience is, essentially. It's going to be mostly salespeople with a combination of engineers, technical people, and strategists. This means that the examples that I give in my workshop needs to be relevant to these people. And then there are the goals. What do I want my audience to take away from this presentation? Well, I've got chaos and order states, right? So I made a previous video on this, but every project that we do, and life is one big project, it goes through periods of chaos states, creative states, as well as ordered states, which are more productive, right? So essentially, I want people to be able to recognize these chaos and order states and apply the right tools to the problem at hand. In the beginning of a project, we're in a very chaotic state, and this is where mind maps are really, really helpful. What else do I want people to get out of this? Well, I want them to be able to use mind maps to essentially become more organized, more productive, as well as intentional, right? So what does it mean by organized, right? Because organized by itself is actually not a benefit. Well, if you feel organized about and on top of all your stuff or all your projects, you're gonna feel less stressed. When you're more productive, that means for a company standpoint, you can generate more revenue. And then intentional. What does intentional mean? Well, it trains us to become second order or more complex and slow, deliberate thinkers. This is actually very healthy for an organization overall, to have people who are actually thinking more than just, essentially the paycheck and what's immediate in front of them, long-term thinking. So already I've got a sense of who I'm talking to, right? As well as the outputs, the goals I want my audience to take away. And the cool thing with a mind map is that you're able to, you see all this white space here. That means as additional information come on, say that you grab a client meeting or a sync with your teammates or your teacher, and they give you more information about where you should actually put your attention to. Well, this white space then provides that room for you to add additional notes or information to, so that you have it readily available once you actually start building out your deck. Next, we gotta structure our story. Every presentation is a story, a linear story at that. So why are we using a nonlinear tool like mind maps for something like a presentation? Well, in the beginning stages of a presentation or trying to create one, it's just completely chaotic. The way that we plan a presentation is actually anything but linear. Thoughts, ideas, as we're trying to put together a story just materializes, right? So the power of a mind map is that you're now able to capture these ideas and form a basic structure around it. And you have a structure that is already recommended that you use, say you're in a large corporation or in university, or even going to pitch a venture capitalist with your startup, there might actually already be an existing recommended structure. So I would recommend using that. So the two examples we're gonna go through, the first one is going to be already a predefined structure. And then I'm gonna go through a non-structured one where you actually have to come up with your own story. So the example that I'm going to use for our given structured approach is one of my friends who is a very high-performing business developer manager at a huge tech firm. And he is someone who is super not stressed about anything. Yet, this one time I saw him and he had been overwhelmed for 3 days straight, literally could not sleep over the weekend. And I asked him why. It turns out that his boss wanted him to create a PowerPoint presentation about annual planning, right? About where he sees the business going, how he wants to grow that business. And this guy was just like, sweating beads. And this is precisely where mind mapping really helps, right? Because he was trying to jump into the structured realm way too quickly when he could have used a mind map to organize his thoughts first before jumping into the story right away. So the predefined structure that his boss wanted him to take was threefold. Well, actually, let's say story, right? The first one is intro, basically who he is, and then we've got current contributions, and then future strategy. So essentially what this is I'm gonna use a different color here just to annotate. This is about him, basically, me. Current contributions, this is about the present and past. And then finally, this is essentially about strategy, right? I like having a red pen to annotate, as well as, for this one, before I even start with the structure or the story, I want to understand what is the presentation structure actually asking of me? What is the purpose of this structure, right? So that's what it is. It's about, you're telling essentially the audience who you are, what you've done in the present, in the past, and finally, what is your strategy going forward for the company? So for here, that means, intro, this is his background, like, how many years worked, right? Role, any previous teams that he's been on. And then let's see, we've got current contributions, right? It's like, well, in the last year, this is almost a bit of a retrospective of sorts, right? Over the last year, how many businesses closed, deals closed, how much revenue, not only that is, how much recurring revenue, right? That's very, very important. And you can actually break this down into, daily, monthly, as well as annual. And then last year also, going back into the process, we're actually gonna create a new node for this, which is process, which is how. how did he actually close the business, right? So here you could have like, multiple steps from first meeting to second meeting and closed. You can also talk about insights, for example, if you want to talk about learnings, right? Plus learnings. And then you can have like, more details here. And then here we're moving on to the future plans. Future plans is interesting. Again, this is a strategic section where do you see the company going forward? So it's like, prospects. We've got essentially new markets. How do you define new markets? Well, you can have geography, which is, you can say, Asia, US, EMEA, which is Europe and Middle East, Africa, right? And then prospects, these are like, your top companies, the top clients. So client 1, 2, and 3. And then perhaps you can have like different attributes to these clients. Why do you think our business model is a good fit for theirs, or our product is a good fit for them? So you're answering the why. Here, this is actually really interesting because even though right now, these 3 are very isolated, you can actually start making connections between the 2. Basically, here, intro to basically me to the current contributions. A possible linkage, maybe highlight that he wants to have is, why was he uniquely suited for closing all these businesses or opening up all these avenues for revenue, right? So unique attributes. And then the linkage between the present and the past to the future strategy is, well, it's actually the process. How he closed these businesses, how he made new business happen matters, right? So how do we translate how to repeat success? And that's where the learnings and the insights essentially will occur. Already, we have a pretty solid idea of going, of using a pre-existing structure and then making a PowerPoint deck out of it. And I'm gonna continue using the red pen here is, well, the intro page could be one slide, right? The unique attributes could be another slide that he can talk about. Because this is just stats. This is like, if you open up a Pokédex, this is like who you are. But it's like the unique attributes, how they lead to the current successes. It can be another slide to highlight that. The third one is, well, last year retrospective, right? So 3 is retrospective. This is more like the stats of sorts. And then you have the process. What worked, what didn't work, what can we do to do better, right? So 4 is process. And then over to the future plans. So this is where we can talk about the strategy component. We can talk about the new markets, which can be its own slide. And then prospects could be its own slide. But really, any of the clients, if you wanted to do a client highlight, right? You can do, well, I'm gonna put 6, maybe 6A, 6B, 6C. So here we actually have 3 slides. And then finally, you can have a conclusion page. Or not. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the end of the story. This is actually 7, this is 6, 7, 8, 9. This essentially is a 10-slide deck if you had a Q&A page in there as well, right? So already you've got the entirety of the structure and the story down. And we only spent 5 minutes on it. And it probably would have saved him 3 days of stress. So what if you were not given a structure and you're running your own business or your own project and you need to explain this workshop to somebody, for example? Using my mind map corporate workshop as an example, here is where I started doing the entire mind map. And we already went through the audience and the goals, but now it's actually the story. I actually wanted people to be more engaged. Again, this is going back to the objective. I knew that if I didn't get people engaged with mind mapping themselves, because it's such an active activity, they're not going to be incentivized to actually even listen. So I wanted to start with a mind mapping exercise right away. And then the intro to the story, I actually used my friend in BD, that PowerPoint example, essentially. So to illustrate the pain that mind mapping is trying to solve. And then I go into the chaos and order states, recognizing where you are in the project timeline, and then using the right tools at the right time. And then after I illustrate that, I go into the mind maps itself, right? So now that I've illustrated the pain, I give the solution. So the solutions mind maps, what it is, how to use it, the basic anatomy of a mind map, and then a few examples that I basically have used myself as well as collected from the YouTube community that has watched my videos. And then I go into a live tutorial where using an iPad, I basically walk through my project management example. And then finally, I break them out into one-on-ones essentially, right? Again, proactive and very interactive is the theme of pretty much all my workshops. I want you guys to actually learn and use this tool. And then finally, we end with the Q&A, right? And that basically completes the entire story. The overarching questions I'm really asking is, how do I get people engaged? Where do I get how do I start the intro, present the pain, present the solution, present essentially a live tutorial, and then finally the breakout sessions for them to explore on their own. All right, let's go through a few pro tips that's gonna make your life a lot easier as you're trying to mind map your presentation. The first one is to draw diagrams and to storyboard out your presentation, right? What that means is here, you can already see that, when I'm talking about order states and chaos states, I'm already drawing different things that I want to present, right? These are essentially rough drafts of the presentation because again, this is the exact order of the presentation that I'm going to be going through. And as I mentioned earlier, each of these nodes can have actually multiple slides, right? So when I'm introducing the concept of chaos states and order states in a project, this could be a slide. If I'm talking about how mind maps reduce stress, this can be another slide. And then if I'm talking about, let's say, mind mapping in the enterprise or corporate realm, then it's like, hey, what does it mean for sales, product, and strategy, right? These are the different types of teams within an organization of how mind maps can actually help. And then finally, this is like kind of the attributes of chaos and order. Again, another slide. So already under this node of order and chaos, I've already got at least 4 slides going on, right? And it really helps to actually storyboard or draw the diagrams that's gonna go on to the presentation so you already have a rough idea of when you actually compile them. So you can actually see here, I just like click and drag because I'm kind of lazy and I think these graphs actually look pretty cool, is I just copy and paste them directly from Notability onto my presentation, right? These graphs are super familiar because literally they are being pulled from the mind map itself. And here, this diagram between this dynamic between sales, product, and strategy, well, here is the actual slide example of it, right? Sales, product, engine, strategy, where my map essentially fits, where the order and chaos, the chaos to order flow actually is. The other tip that I would recommend is to get feedback on your mind map before you even put in the effort to creating the presentation. So before going through and putting, all this into slides, I actually got several of my friends feedback on the structure of it and I actually walk them through the story. Presentation and slides, they're just an assist. They don't actually tell the story. You're telling the story. A mind map is more than adequate to actually tell the basic draft of a story to somebody else just to understand, if the flow is even working, right? And if you're working inside a team or with your boss, walking the mind map through with somebody else is almost critical. It's actually highly recommended that you do this before putting in like 90% of your hard-earned time essentially into the project or into the presentation. All right, if you have done all of the above steps, you're in such good shape of putting everything into just the deck. And I think I already showed you how the storyboarding and pasting things directly into the slides is makes essentially the slides themselves super, super, super easy, right? Because you have already put all of the content, all the relevant content of the presentation, of the slides onto your mind map. So it's a matter of just like formatting at this point. So you have 2 options here. And for the record, I create all of my own slides. I design all of my own slides. But I know in corporations, as well as these days on Fiverr, you can probably just hire somebody to actually make it look really pretty. What you cannot outsource is the story, as well as your understanding of the objectives and your audience, right? And that's precisely where the mind map is really useful. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments below what you think of, all of the tips and tools that's been shared, as well as any of the frustrations you've had with presentations. I would love to hear it. And also, if you found this useful, click the subscribe button or like button. It helps this channel out a lot. As always, I really appreciate you guys, and see you soon.